These two village black pastors vanished in 1974, but the local priest made a really shocking confession 28 years later. One early morning in 1974, the villagers in St. Mary's village, wrapped in wool shawls and faded coats, gathered in front of the stone church that stood at the heart of the settlement. Horse-drawn carts stopped near the church gate, and two men stepped down quietly. One was bearded, with deep calm in his eyes, Pastor Samuel Okoro from Nigeria. Beside him stood a gentler figure, with round spectacles perched on his nose, Pastor David Mensah from Ghana. Their suits were simple but clean. The villagers watched curiously. Some whispered prayers of welcome. Others watched in silent uncertainty. Father Gregory stood on the church steps, his bald head shining. He wore a warm smile, the kind a priest was expected to give. Yet his eyes remained distant and cold, like a winter lake. He stepped forward, arms open, and said loudly for all to hear, "Brothers Samuel and David, welcome to St. Mary's. May the Lord guide our hands together." The villagers clapped. Children smiled and waved at the pastors. Behind the applause, Father Gregory's smile trembled, not from joy, but from something bitter lodged in his chest. That night, the village seemed almost too quiet. Father Gregory sat alone in his study, robes loosened, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside him. He leaned forward, hands clasped, his whisper a blade in the dark. "They call this God's house, yet they send me them." He didn't say the word. He didn't need to. The venom in his voice was enough. In the small guest quarters behind the church, Pastor Samuel and Pastor David unpacked silently. Despite their exhaustion from travel, their spirits were light. David smiled as he placed his Bible on the table. "Do you think they'll accept us?" Samuel paused, his gaze thoughtful. "I have faith. Love does not know skin or boundary. If we serve with sincerity, they'll see our hearts." David nodded. "Then let's give them our best." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees as though warning them, "Not everyone here prays with love." Days passed. The two pastors began their duties at the church. They swept the old floors, polished the brass candles, helped villagers collect firewood, and visited the sick. The village children followed them like little shadows. Pastor David played the harmonium during youth choir, while Pastor Samuel told Bible stories under the sycamore tree, his voice rising and falling like a storyteller from another world. The congregation, once quiet and mechanical, began to feel alive again. One Sunday morning, pews were filled more than usual. Pastor Samuel stepped to the pulpit to give his first sermon. His voice was deep, gentle, yet filled with fire. "Faith," he said, "is not found in walls or robes. It's found in how we treat one another, especially the ones we don't understand." People leaned forward. Some wiped tears. Behind him, at the altar, Father Gregory stood stiff. His jaw was tight. He had never seen them so captivated by someone else's voice. When Samuel finished, there was silence, then thunderous applause. Old Mrs. Carpenter stood to her feet. Children clapped. Even the choir smiled. Father Gregory's fists clenched so tightly around his rosary that his knuckles turned white. He whispered under his breath, "This is my church." Later that evening, candlelight from the chapel windows glowed across the cobblestones. Inside, Father Gregory knelt before the altar. The stained-glass saints looked down upon him, silent witnesses. He prayed, but his words were jagged. "Lord, why them? Why here? Was I not enough? Have I not given everything to this church?" His voice shook, not with humility, but with wounded pride. No answer came, only the cold stone beneath his knees. Meanwhile, Pastor David wrote a letter to his mother back home. "The people here are kind," he wrote, "but I sense something beneath the surface." Father Gregory smiles, but his eyes do not. Samuel says we must be patient and gracious. I pray he is right. Pastor Samuel walked into the room, holding 2 cups of tea. "Writing home again?" David smiled faintly. "It helps me breathe." Samuel sat beside him. "Do not let fear plant roots in you. We are here for a reason." The next Sunday was even more crowded than before. Rain hammered against stained glass, but still they came. Old men, young mothers, boys with muddy shoes. They came not to hear Father Gregory. They came for the men from far away. Father Gregory announced the hymn with mechanical politeness. Then he stepped back. Pastor Samuel stood again at the pulpit. His voice rolled like thunder and whispered like prayer. He spoke of unity, forgiveness, and how God crafted all men from the same dust. Somewhere in the crowd a man whispered, "Amen." Others nodded fiercely. When Samuel stepped down, the church erupted in applause. This time, Father Gregory did not clap. He only watched. His eyes no longer hid the storm brewing inside. That night, rain soaked the earth. The church bell tower groaned in the wind. Father Gregory stood staring at the empty pews. The echo of applause still rang in his ears. Not for him. Not anymore. He gripped the wooden edge of the altar, breath trembling. "They are taking my church," he whispered. Slowly, quietly. His reflection in the stained glass looked warped, half saint, half shadow. Outside, lightning split the sky, white and merciless. Inside, something inside Father Gregory split too. Not loud, not sudden, but quietly, like rot under polished wood. The stage was set, not for healing, but for betrayal. The church bells still rang each morning, but something unseen had shifted in St. Mary's village. The laughter of children still echoed through the courtyard, and the voices of the congregation still joined in hymns. But behind every smile, behind every prayer, shadows were forming. Father Gregory felt them tightening around him, not as threats, but as reminders of his growing irrelevance. Each day he watched Pastor Samuel and Pastor David connect with the villagers in ways he never could. Children followed them like guardian angels. Women from the choir praised their kindness. Even the elderly, once cold and rigid, asked them to pray over their sick and dying. Father Gregory saw the way people now looked past him to find them. Jealousy, once a dull ache, became a cold fire. One evening, under the flickering glow of a single candle in his study, Father Gregory pressed his palm atop his Bible and whispered, "They will not take this church from me. They will not take God from me." But deep down he wasn't protecting God. He was protecting his pride. The change began quietly. Father Gregory never spoke ill of the pastors in public. No one saw him scowl when they passed him bread at dinner or when they carried firewood to old widows. But whispers began to drift among the pews like insects no one could see. "Did you hear?" a woman whispered to her neighbor at the bakery. "Someone said Pastor David counts the offering alone, and some coins went missing last week." Another voice at the well, "Pastor Samuel, he speaks so passionately." Some say those aren't true Catholic teachings. They're African superstitions. The rumors were gentle at first, like harmless smoke. But Father Gregory knew, smoke always meant fire was coming. Inside the stone church, beneath golden candlelight, Father Gregory sought allies. The first was Raymond, the blacksmith. His arms were thick like tree trunks, his face burned by years near the forge. Raymond was a devoted churchgoer, loud in prayer and louder in temper. But Father Gregory knew his weakness, money. One night, as rain pattered against the workshop roof, Father Gregory visited him. "Raymond," he said, lowering his voice, "the church is in danger. These foreign pastors, people trust them blindly. But trust can be broken. And if the church falls, your donations, your contracts for metalwork, they fall too." Raymond frowned, wiping sweat from his brow. "What are you asking of me, Father?" "I want protection, loyalty. In return, I can make sure the church funds support its true heirs." Raymond's eyes flickered. Greed found a home in his heart. The second was Martin, the gravedigger. Martin was a quiet man who spoke only when spoken to. His days were spent carving names on tombstones and digging graves with calm precision. He never missed a Sunday Mass, never smiled, never cried. Father Gregory approached him in the cemetery at dusk, where the crosses cast long shadows over damp earth. "Martin," he murmured, "you've seen many buried here. The church has always been your only friend. Help me protect it." Martin stared at the fresh grave before him, then nodded once. No questions, no emotion. That was enough. The last was Lucas, the tavern owner. Lucas smiled at everyone, but his eyes betrayed him. Tired, burdened, drowning in unpaid debts. His tavern, once vibrant, now stood half empty. His wife was ill, and his creditors were no longer patient men. Father Gregory visited late at night, sitting across from him at a lonely wooden table. "I know your troubles," he said softly. "I know your debt. Help me safeguard God's house, and I will ensure you receive assistance from the church treasury." Lucas hesitated, fingers tremoring around his cup. But desperation speaks louder than conscience. "I'll do it," he whispered. They met again days later, in the abandoned bell tower after midnight. Raymond, Martin, and Lucas stood in silence as Father Gregory faced them. "You are not doing this for me," he said. "You're doing it for God, for purity, for truth." Raymond shifted uneasily. Lucas looked at the floor. Only Martin remained eerily still. Father Gregory's voice dropped lower. "Samuel and David, they pretend to preach peace, but they bring lies. If people love them more than the church, then the church loses its soul." He paused, eyes darkening. "And sometimes, sacrifices must be made to reveal the devil wearing sheep's wool." Raymond swallowed. "What do you mean, Father?" Father Gregory stepped closer, his whisper colder than the night. "We need proof of their evil. Something that cannot be denied. A tragedy that will open every eye." Lucas whispered, "You mean someone has to die?" The word hung in the air like a blade. Father Gregory didn't answer. He only said, "God himself demanded sacrifice to save humanity." Martin finally spoke, voice flat. "Whose sacrifice?" At that, Father Gregory looked toward the church windows glowing in the dark. "A sinner," he said. "Someone no one would mourn. Someone they could be blamed for." Raymond's face turned pale. Lucas trembled. Martin simply blinked. "Their hands," Father Gregory whispered, "must be stained. Then everyone will know they were never men of God." Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating their faces, faces already stained with the first sin of betrayal. Outside, the night was still. The church bell tower stood silent against the sky. But inside its walls, something holy had been broken. The pact was made, not with God, but with darkness. And from that moment on, Father Gregory was no longer just a priest. He was a man preparing to sacrifice innocence to protect his pride. And the village, still asleep in its innocence, had no idea that the greatest evil was not arriving from outside. It was being born within their own church. It was well past midnight when the shouting began. It came from near the church gardens, harsh, angry voices cutting through the silence. Villagers peered through windows and cracked doors. Shadows flickered near the old stone wall separating the rectory from Elias Carter's farmland. Elias was a tall, gaunt farmer with calloused hands and a temper sharpened by hardship. His crops had failed twice that year. His cattle had grown thin. He had borrowed church land to plant barley, promising his rent after harvest. But harvest came, and his pockets were still empty. Now he stood before Father Gregory, chest rising and falling with rage. "You're bleeding me dry," Elias snarled. "I've served this church all my life. You can't throw my family off the land over a few coins." Father Gregory's face was calm, but his hands trembled behind his robes. "The land belongs to God, Elias. You made a promise. A man of God cannot overlook debt, especially from one who spends more at taverns than on his children's shoes." Elias stepped forward, fists clenched. "Say that again." The priest's eyes hardened. "Leave, Elias, before you regret what your anger makes you do." The farmer spat on the ground. "You're no shepherd. You're a vulture in priest's clothing." He turned to walk away. No one saw who moved first. No one saw how the struggle began. Only muffled grunts, a gasp, then a dull thud. Silence. Minutes later, the chapel bell rang once. Not a call to prayer, but a tremor in the night. Morning brought mist and dread. Elias's body was found beside the stone wall, his head bloodied by a sharp rock, eyes frozen toward the sky. Beside him lay his rosary, broken, beads darkened with blood. Whispers spread faster than the morning fog. "Elias is dead. Murdered." Some said he slipped. Others said someone heard voices, Father Gregory's, and others. But before speculation could grow, Father Gregory acted. Inside the rectory, his hand shook, not with grief, but urgency. Elias's blood still clung faintly to his sleeve. The weight of what happened clung to him like chains. Raymond, Martin, and Lucas stood before him, pale and silent. "This was not the plan," Lucas whispered. "You said a sacrifice, but you didn't." Father Gregory cut him off. "It was an accident. He attacked me first. There is no time for regret, only action." Raymond's eyes darted to the window. "What do we do?" The priest's voice grew steady, colder. "We do what must be done. This death will be their sin. The pastors." Under the cover of darkness, Father Gregory entered Pastor Samuel and Pastor David's quarters. The wooden floor creaked beneath his shoes. The room smelled faintly of old books and sandalwood. He stood beside Samuel's bedside and placed Elias's blood-stained rosary beneath his pillow. Then, a scrap of cloth soaked in blood behind David's Bible. His hands trembled only once. Before leaving, he looked around their quiet room, their open Bibles, their notes for the next Sunday sermon. For a moment, guilt flickered, then died. At dawn, police from the nearby town arrived. 3 officers in dark coats, mud splattering their boots as they crossed the churchyard. Villagers gathered in silence. Father Gregory greeted them with eyes reddened, perhaps from lack of sleep, perhaps from practiced sorrow. One officer asked, "You reported the body, Father. Tell us what you know." Father Gregory breathed deeply, voice faltering with feigned grief. "Elias came to me last night, angry about unpaid land rent. Samuel and David were nearby. I left them. I thought they calmed him down. But before dawn I found him dead." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Pastor Samuel stepped forward. "Father Gregory, that's not true. We returned to our rooms after evening prayers." But Father Gregory lowered his head. A tear fell, perfectly timed. "I wanted to believe that." The officer turned cold eyes toward the pastors. "Search their quarters." Villagers held their breath. Moments later, a policeman emerged, holding Elias's blood-stained rosary. Another followed, raising the crimson cloth. A gasp. A single scream from a nearby woman. Samuel stepped back, stunned. No, this isn't ours." David's voice shook. "Please, listen. They're planted. Someone wants." But the crowd had already made its decision. Prejudice, invisible, silent, old as the soil beneath them, took root. A man whispered, I knew it. Outsiders bring misfortune. Another muttered, they talk of forgiveness, while hiding blood. Handcuffs clinked. Pastor Samuel didn't resist. Tears glistened in his eyes, not for himself, but for the betrayal now unfolding in the house of God. Pastor David fell to his knees as an officer pulled him up roughly. His Bible slipped from his hand and hit the ground with a soft thud, pages fluttering open as though crying out. "Please," Samuel said, voice breaking. "You know us. You've prayed with us. This is not who we are." But no hand reached for them. No voice spoke for them. Not even the children who once clung to their robes. And at the top of the church steps, Father Gregory stood, expression still, eyes unreadable. Samuel looked at him, pain sharper than chains. "Father, why?" The priest did not answer. The bell tolled above them, cold and hollow. The doors of the church, God's house, remained open. But for Samuel and David, faith itself felt closed. As they were led toward the police carriage, the villagers stepped back, not out of respect, but fear, disgust, confusion. Their Bibles lay forgotten on the ground, pages kissed by the wind. Samuel whispered to David, "God sees, even if they don't." David nodded weakly. But why does it hurt so much when God's people are the ones who turn away? The carriage doors slammed shut. The wheels began to roll. Father Gregory turned away before the dust could reach his feet. But something inside him whispered, "You have not saved God's church. You have condemned your own soul." The courtroom smelled of old wood and damp wool coats. At the center stood Pastor Samuel and Pastor David, wrists chained, faces drained but calm with a quiet dignity. The trial had barely begun, and yet everyone knew how it would end. Father Gregory sat in the front row beside the visiting bishop, his expression carved from sorrow and duty. He kept his eyes lowered, playing the role of a heartbroken shepherd forced to witness the downfall of his flock. The judge, a stern man with gray eyebrows and a voice like gravel, cleared his throat. "We are here to determine whether Samuel Okoro and David Mensah, priests assigned to St. Mary's Church, are guilty of the murder of Elias Carter." No one spoke of how quickly the trial was arranged. No one questioned why no outside investigators were called. The villagers, many of whom had once embraced the pastors, now sat rigid, avoiding their eyes. The prosecution called its first witness, Raymond, the blacksmith. He stood straight, hands folded. "I saw them near Elias that night," he said, though his eyes flickered with guilt. "They argued over church money. Elias accused them of stealing offerings." Whispers rose among the crowd. The judge nodded. And then, Raymond hesitated only for a moment. "I left before it got violent, but I heard Elias scream." Next came Lucas, the tavern owner, voice trembling but rehearsed. They came to the tavern before sunset. Elias was angry. He said they tricked the church. He said they threatened him. Finally, Martin, the gravedigger, calm, emotionless. "I found the blood near their quarters. God forgive me, but I believe they killed him." No tears, no hesitation. Their words were knives, each one sharpened by Father Gregory. Pastor Samuel was allowed to speak. He rose, shackles clinking softly. "Judge, people of St. Mary's, we have served you with open hands and open hearts. We loved your children. We prayed with your sick. We did not kill Elias. We begged Father Gregory to help him with his debts. That is the truth." Pastor David stepped forward, eyes wet but fierce. "We forgive those who lie about us. But God hears truth even when the world is deaf to it." The villagers lowered their eyes. No one stood. Not one voice said, "I believe them." The verdict came swiftly, almost expected. Guilty as charged. Sentenced to life imprisonment. A gasp echoed, but no protests followed. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, a silent prayer passing his lips. David trembled, but did not weep. Father Gregory crossed himself slowly, like a man grieving righteousness. But inside his chest, a hollow victory throbbed. Later that evening, while thunder rolled across the sky, Father Gregory met privately with the bishop in the candlelit rectory. The bishop placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "You have done a difficult duty, Father. You protected the church from scandal. You acted swiftly and with wisdom. God will bless you." A sealed envelope slid across the polished desk. Inside, additional funds for the church, and a personal commendation for preserving the sanctity of St. Mary's. Father Gregory bowed his head humbly, but his eyes were not humble at all. Raymond, Martin, and Lucas waited in the back room of the rectory. Father Gregory entered, robes flowing, face composed. He tossed 3 small leather pouches onto the table. "Your share." Raymond grabbed his, weighing it in his palm. Silver coins clinked. Lucas opened his bag, his eyes widened, though disappointment lingered. This isn't what you promised." Father Gregory's voice was cold. "You were paid for your silence, not for greed. Be content." Raymond frowned. "But your share is larger." The priest's gaze sharpened. "Because I bear the burden. I spoke to the bishop. I carry the guilt. You are simple helpers." Martin said nothing, but his jaw tightened. For the first time, a fracture appeared in their alliance. Something unspoken. Something dangerous. Meanwhile, in a stone-walled prison 2 towns away, the pastors were led down a dark corridor. Their cell was small. Damp walls, iron bars, a straw mattress. The door slammed shut with finality. Pastor Samuel sank to his knees. Pastor David sat against the wall, staring at his trembling hands. Minutes passed. Neither spoke. Then, quietly, Samuel whispered, "David." David looked up. Samuel's eyes glistened, but his voice remained steady. "God sees what they've done. One day, He will reveal the truth." David's lips trembled. "And until then?" Samuel reached over, placing a hand over his. "Until then, we endure." He picked up a small stone from the floor and scratched a word into the wall. "Faith." The prison was cold. The chains were heavy. But that word glowed in the darkness. Back in the village, the church was quieter than before. The pews were full, but the songs were empty. Children did not laugh in the courtyard. Women did not bake for Sunday gatherings. Somehow, the village felt colder, less blessed, as though God had stepped back and was watching. Father Gregory stood before the altar that night, staring at the crucifix. His reflection in the candle wax looked twisted, half holy, half monstrous. He whispered, "I saved your church." But in the silent chapel, the carved Christ on the cross seemed to watch him with sorrow. Not approval, not anger, just sorrow. And somewhere far away, in a prison cell, 2 innocent men whispered prayers into the night. Their chains clinked, and their faith held on. Years slid by like dust across a forgotten altar. In the cold stone walls of St. Bartholomew Prison, Pastors Samuel and David grew older, but not harder. Time carved lines into their faces, silvered their hair, and weakened their bones, yet their resolve refused to break. Their cell was small, 2 iron beds, a cracked window, and a single flickering bulb that hummed through the darkness. At first, the other inmates mocked them, calling them holy men with bitterness and laughter. But as the months turned to years, something shifted. Samuel would sit on his bed each morning, Bible open, voice soft as he read aloud verses of forgiveness and hope. David would speak to the younger inmates who trembled with rage or wept silently at night. He didn't preach, he listened. He held their stories, theft, betrayal, hunger, regret, as though they were sacred confessions. Slowly, hardened criminals softened. Men who could barely write learned to trace words from Scripture with calloused fingers. Violent tempers quieted during evening prayers. Some guards mocked them, others watched with a quiet unease, as if sensing something holy blooming in a place built for despair. While the pastors endured their silent suffering, Father Gregory's world only grew brighter. He rose swiftly through the church ranks. Letters of commendation arrived from bishops. His sermons were quoted in local newspapers. The diocese praised him for handling scandal with grace and protecting the church's image. He became district head priest, presiding over councils with calm authority. Villagers bowed their heads as he passed on the roads, whispering blessings he never truly believed in anymore. But the nights, those were different. It began subtly, a dream of dimly lit corridors, soft footsteps echoing in the dark. Then, two silhouettes at the end of the church aisle, dressed in worn prison garments. Pastor Samuel's gentle voice would echo across the pews, "Father, why?" David's eyes, tired yet unwavering, followed with a whisper that chilled him. "Did you think God would sleep forever?" Gregory would awaken in sweat, heart hammering, the echo of phantom footsteps still ringing in his ears. Meanwhile, the three conspirators, Raymond, Martin, and Lucas, spent their blood-stained earnings without remorse. They drank fine palm wine, gambled under lantern light, and boasted of outsmarting priests and pastors alike. But money, like sin, eventually runs dry. 28 years had passed. The coins were gone. Their clothes frayed. Their homes filled with unpaid debts and whispered rumors. And worse, Father Gregory stopped inviting them to his office. No more secret meetings. No more envelopes of hush money. They weren't getting jobs as they used to do anymore over the years. Bitterness festered. Martin took to alcohol, his hands shaking more each day. Lucas roamed from village to village, begging for small work, haunted by the memory of Elias' lifeless eyes. Raymond, the boldest, began whispering to the others, "Gregory made us take the fall. He got the praise. We got the crumbs." The bond of shared sin began to crack. Inside the prison, another winter crept through iron bars. Pastor Samuel's beard was now wholly white. His kneeling left knee ached when he prayed. Yet he still whispered at night, "David, one day, truth walks faster than lies." David nodded. "Even if we never leave these walls, God will leave no stone unturned." Back in the village, Father Gregory celebrated 35 years of priesthood. Candles lit the chapel in golden light. Choirs sang hymns of gratitude. But as he raised the chalice during Mass, he saw, if only for a heartbeat, blood instead of wine. The cup trembled slightly in his hands. That night, he locked himself in his study. Rain battered the church roof. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he had allowed himself in private only. His hand shook. He opened a drawer. Inside lay Elias' rosary, darkened with time. He kept it not out of sentiment, but because he could never bear to throw it away. Lightning flashed through the stained glass window. A knock. No footsteps had approached. No servant was outside. Only a sealed envelope lay on the doorstep of his study. No name. No wax seal. Just paper, yellowed and damp from the storm. His fingers trembled as he tore it open. Inside, in sharp, deliberate handwriting, "We need more, or everyone will know." No signature. No greeting. But he didn't need one. He knew. Raymond. Martin. Lucas. The walls seemed to press in on him. The church bell tolled midnight, deep and mournful. For the first time in years, Father Gregory knelt, not in devotion, but in terror. Rain had fallen over the village for 3 days straight, turning the fields into rivers of mud and the sky into a gray, unbroken shroud. Yet inside Father Gregory's grand residence behind the church, candles burned, silverware glimmered, and his polished boots clicked across marble floors. To the villagers, he was a symbol of unwavering faith and discipline. But in the silence of his study, his heart lived in constant unrest. The unsigned letter lay on his desk, its words carved through his mind like a knife. "We need more, or everyone will know." Raymond, Martin, and Lucas, men he had once called protectors of the church, now drunk, penniless, and dangerous. His nights became sleepless again. Shadows clung to the corners of his vision. Every knock on the church door felt like doom. The bishop was due to visit soon. The church's 50th anniversary celebration was approaching, and Gregory was to be honored before the entire district. If the truth surfaced now, his legacy, his status, his very soul would be shattered. 3 days after receiving the letter, a note arrived under his door. "Tonight, the Old Forest Chapel. Come alone. Bring money." He went. The Forest Chapel stood at the edge of the village, abandoned, draped in vines and silence. The moonlight filtered through its broken wooden beams as Father Gregory stepped inside, clutching a leather satchel filled with money. Raymond leaned against the altar, arms crossed. Lucas sat on a pew, tapping his foot nervously. Martin's face was half hidden in the shadows, his eyes cold and observant. "So," Raymond drawled, smirking, "the Holy Father finally comes to confess." Gregory swallowed. "This is foolish. You will get more money. But this must end. No more threats." Lucas laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "You ended it when the money stopped coming." Martin stepped forward. "You taught us, Father, that sin pays better than prayer." Gregory's chest tightened. "Enough. Take this and disappear. Never contact me again." He set the satchel onto the altar. Raymond opened it, glanced at the money, then back at Gregory. "This? After all these years? This is nothing. I have church accounts to maintain, eyes on me constantly." "No," Martin interrupted quietly. "You have fear, and fear is expensive." They stepped closer. Raymond's voice lowered to a whisper. "You'll keep paying us, or we'll walk into the bishop's office and tell them about Elias, about the pastors, about the rosary." Silence hung thick. Father Gregory felt something inside him break. He left that chapel with his hands trembling and his lungs aching for air. Their words followed him all the way back to the church. "Sin pays, Father. Sin pays." He barely slept that night. Guilt was no longer his enemy. Exposure was. The next morning, he made a decision. He packed a small suitcase, locked his study, and boarded the early train to the city without a word to anyone. His clerical collar felt like a noose. In the city, whispers of corruption and crime hid beneath cathedral bells. Gregory walked through narrow alleys behind markets, away from the pious gaze of fellow priests. Eventually, he was led, through quiet transactions and dangerous introductions, to a dimly lit room above a tavern, where 2 men waited. Mitch, tall, lean, with eyes like cold steel. Leon, broader, silent, a scar cutting across his jaw. They smelled of gunpowder and secrets. Gregory's voice trembled at first but steadied as he spoke. "I need this done quietly. 3 men. No witnesses. I'll pay double." Mitch leaned forward. "Accidents? Or disappearances?" Gregory hesitated. "Disappearances. Permanent ones." Leon exchanged a slow glance with Mitch. "Names. Location." Gregory slid a folded note across the table. The assassins didn't even look at it immediately. They looked at him. "You sure you're a man of God?" Mitch asked lowly. Gregory's jaw tightened. "I am a man protecting God's house." Mitch smirked. "If you say so." They shook hands. His palm was cold against theirs. Back in the village, the Forest Chapel sat in silence, unaware that death had already been purchased. Father Gregory returned 2 days later, his face pale, his eyes hollow. The preparations for the church anniversary had begun. Choirs rehearsed. Bells rang every morning. His image, holy, righteous, untouchable, had never been brighter. But at night he paced. He kept repeating to himself, "This is necessary. This is survival. This is justice." But none of those words silenced the other voice, the one that whispered from the depth of forgotten confessions, "Murder wears no cross." Meanwhile, Raymond, Martin, and Lucas felt triumphant. They believed Gregory was cornered now. They spent what little they had on drink that night, toasting to the misery of the man who once controlled them. Lucas, though, felt uneasy. "Maybe we should stop. This has gone too far." Raymond scoffed. "He owes us, and he knows it." Martin remained quiet, staring at the door of the tavern. They did not notice two unfamiliar figures watching from across the street, one lighting a cigarette, the other sharpening a knife beneath the lantern light. Father Gregory knelt in the chapel that night, hands trembling over the altar. He did not pray for forgiveness. He prayed not to be discovered. Somewhere in the distance, wolves howled. A storm gathered, and three men, once conspirators, now targets, drank their last cups in ignorance. The fog rolled in thick over the village that night, swallowing the moonlight and turning every shadow into something living. No church bell rang. No hymn floated through the air. The silence was heavy, like the world was holding its breath. From the dusty road leading into the village, two strangers arrived with a wooden cart and covered crates. To anyone who asked, they were merchants from the neighboring towns selling wine and tools. Their names were Mitch and Leon, but no one needed to know that. They kept to themselves, asked few questions, and listened to everything. They were not here for business. They were here for blood. Raymond, Martin, and Lucas had abandoned the tavern for the night. The coins from their last round of blackmail were nearly gone, but they clung to the false comfort of alcohol to drown the guilt and fear simmering beneath their laughter. Deep in the woods stood an old hunter's cabin, half-rotten, missing window panes, smelling of smoke and damp leaves. It was their secret refuge. Lucas sat by the fireplace, rubbing his tired eyes. Martin traced the rim of a bottle with his finger, quiet, watchful. Raymond laughed the loudest, slamming his cup on the table, boasting about the past. "They think Father Gregory is a saint," he snorted. "If only they knew who buried the truth with Elias." Martin's jaw tightened. "You should be careful with those words." "Oh, come on," Raymond sneered. "No one's listening." But someone was. Just beyond the tree line, Mitch and Leon watched the cabin. Through a cracked window, they could see the flicker of firelight, hear muffled laughter, smell cheap whiskey staining the walls. Leon checked his pistol. Mitch unfolded a crumpled piece of paper. On it, 3 names were written. 3 fates sealed. "He wants it clean," Mitch muttered. "No survivors." Leon only nodded. That same moment, at the church, Father Gregory knelt at the altar. He did not light a candle. He did not speak the holy prayers. His lips trembled with a single question: "Have I gone too far?" He clasped his hands until his knuckles turned white. Thunder rumbled outside like an ancient warning. "God forgive me," he thought, "but it must be done." He did not know the assassins were already in position. Back in the cabin, the night was swollen with tension. Lucas felt it first, a strange unease, like unseen eyes were watching. He stood, intending to step outside for air. The door burst open. A flash of steel. A deafening gunshot. Raymond didn't even scream. He collapsed onto the table, eyes wide, whiskey bottle rolling from his lifeless hand. Martin froze. Lucas dropped to his knees. Mitch stepped inside first, pistol raised. Leon followed, closing the door behind them with eerie calm. Martin lifted his hands slowly. "Please, please, we'll leave. We won't say a word to anyone." Mitch didn't answer. He took a photograph from his coat pocket and tossed it on the ground. Father Gregory's face stared back at them. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. No, he wouldn't. Leon's voice was cold. He did. Martin whispered. We helped him. We did everything he asked. And now he asks for this, Mitch replied. 2 more gunshots split the air. Martin fell sideways, clutching his chest. Lucas felt fire explode through his stomach as the bullet tore into him. He collapsed, gasping, blood seeping through his shirt, pooling beneath him like spilled wine. Mitch stepped forward to finish it, but Leon placed a hand on his arm. He's already dying. Leave him. Mitch hesitated, then turned away. The 2 assassins walked out as quietly as they had entered, their boots leaving blood-stained prints across the wooden floor. They vanished into the night. Hours passed. The fire dimmed. Rain began to fall. Lucas lay there, barely breathing. His vision blurred. His heart pounded weakly in his chest. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. He whispered a single word, over and over, tears mixing with blood. Father Gregory! Father Gregory! At dawn, 2 shepherd boys passing through the woods noticed smoke rising from the abandoned cabin. Curious, they stepped inside and screamed. Villagers soon gathered, gasping, covering their mouths in horror. They found Raymond and Martin dead. Lucas, soaked in blood, pale as ashes, was still alive, but only just. Get the doctor! Quickly! Someone shouted. He was carried through the village, past the church, to the village hospital. Lucas was rushed to the hospital miles away. Villagers murmured. Rumors began to spread like wildfire. And for the first time since the pastors were imprisoned, the truth trembled on the edge of revelation. 3 miles away, in the old county hospital, Lucas Mensa, once a drunken blackmailer, now a dying witness, lay pale against white sheets. Tubes trailed from his arms. Machines beeped softly, as though counting his fading breaths. A nurse, crossing the hallway, gasped when she saw his eyelids flutter. Doctor! He's waking! Within minutes, 2 officers stood outside the room. Moments later, a detective stepped in, a stern man with gray at his temples and tired eyes. He leaned close. Lucas, can you hear me? Lucas blinked slowly. His lips were cracked, voice barely a whisper. Yes. Who did this to you? The detective asked. Lucas swallowed, breath shivering. We blackmailed him. We thought he'd just pay. Who? The detective pressed. Tears slipped from the corner of Lucas's eyes. The priest. Father Gregory. The room fell silent. The doctor froze. The nurse took a step back. The detective said nothing for a long while. He did not fully believe it, but he could not ignore it either. Meanwhile, rumors were spreading like wildfire through the village. Some said Lucas had survived. Some whispered that the men were not killed by thieves, but by hired assassins. Most dismissed it. Father Gregory? Never. But the police began to dig. They searched the abandoned cabin. Blood on the walls. Bullet casings. Broken bottles. And then something unexpected. Just above the doorframe outside the cabin, an old, rusted metal box with a lens. A villager named Old Man Theo hobbled forward when the police questioned the device. It's mine, he muttered. Hunters, thieves. They used this path. Installed it months ago. Forgot to take it down. The detective's voice sharpened. Did it record that night? Theo shrugged. It records when it hears sound. Forest noises. Animals, maybe more. Police retrieved the camera's footage. They watched in silence at the station. On the grainy recording, they saw 3 men inside the cabin. Raymond, Martin, Lucas. Laughter. Then the door burst open. Gunshots. Raymond dead instantly. Then, the moment that froze everyone, the taller assassin, Mitch, pulled a photograph from his coat pocket and dropped it to the floor in front of Martin and Lucas. Father Gregory's face stared back at them. No sound, but they could read Martin's lips clearly. "Father Gregory." Another gunshot. Martin fell. Lucas collapsed beside him. The assassins walked out into the night. The tape ended. No one spoke. The detective closed his eyes slowly and said only one word. Church. The church was filled with the soft hum of hymns and the scent of incense that Sunday morning. The villagers had gathered as they always did, dressed in their finest, eyes fixed on Father Gregory, the man they revered as God's chosen shepherd. The sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, painting the marble floor with colors of reverence and peace. But behind the pulpit, Father Gregory's hands trembled. His voice wavered as he read from the scriptures, his once booming, confident tone now thin and fragile. Every word seemed to echo with the weight of guilt. He could feel their eyes on him, hundreds of them, innocent and trusting, and for the first time, their devotion felt suffocating. As he lifted the chalice for communion, the heavy oak doors creaked open. The sound sliced through the holy silence. Everyone turned. A group of uniformed police officers entered, their boots thudding against the polished floor. The lead officer's expression was grim, his badge glinting in the light. "Father Gregory Marin," the officer called. The church went dead silent. Even the choir stopped mid-hymn. Father Gregory froze, his hand tightening around the chalice until it trembled. "You're under arrest," the officer continued, "for the murder of Raymond Audet, Martin Callow, and attempted murder of Lucas Boma. You have the right to remain silent." Gasps erupted from the congregation. Women clutched their rosaries. Children hid behind their mothers. The bishop's portrait hanging above the altar seemed to watch silently as the revered priest's world crumbled. Father Gregory's lips parted, but no words came. His mind raced, images flashing of the assassins, the bribe money, the blood on the forest floor, the two black pastors behind bars. Everything he'd buried for years was clawing its way to the surface. I don't understand," he stammered weakly. "There must be some mistake." But the officers didn't pause. Two of them approached, cuffing him as whispers rippled through the pews. One old woman cried out, "No, not Father Gregory." Another shouted, "He baptized my children." The officer gently but firmly led him out through the aisle, the sound of his chains echoing where prayers once did. The once proud priest hung his head, his cassock brushing against the floor. The villagers' eyes followed him, eyes filled with disbelief, confusion, and betrayal. For decades, they had believed this man was a pillar of purity. Now, they watched him being taken away like a criminal. At the police station, the lights were harsh, unforgiving. Father Gregory sat in the interrogation room, hands clasped tightly, sweat glistening on his brow. Across from him sat Detective Aroka, a calm, sharp-eyed man who had spent 20 years reading guilt in faces. "We have footage," Aroka said, placing a tablet on the table. He pressed play. The video flickered to life, the assassins standing before the drunken trio in the cabin. The grainy image was enough to make Gregory's stomach turn. Then came the unmistakable moment, Mitch holding up a photograph, his photograph, before pulling the trigger. Father Gregory closed his eyes. His lips moved as though reciting a prayer, but it was empty now, a ritual stripped of faith. "I don't know those men," he whispered hoarsely. Aroka leaned forward. "Then why did they carry your picture?" Gregory's eyes snapped open, panic flickering in them. "That's impossible. You don't understand. This is a mistake. I've served the Lord for 40 years. 40 years of lies," the detective cut in sharply. "The black pastors, Samuel and David. You framed them. You bribed those 3 men to lie, didn't you?" Gregory's breathing quickened. "No, Lucas survived, Aroka interrupted again. He told us everything. The words struck like thunder. Father Gregory froze. His throat tightened as his heart pounded against his ribs. He said you paid them to accuse the pastors. He said you ordered their deaths when they began to demand more money. The silence in the room was unbearable. The ticking of the clock on the wall felt deafening. Then, slowly, Father Gregory slumped forward. His shoulders began to shake. A low, broken sound escaped his throat, a sob, heavy and desperate. The mask had finally shattered. I didn't want them here, he confessed softly, voice quivering. They were sent to me, 2 black men, telling me how to preach in my own parish. I thought it was wrong. I thought they would ruin everything. Tears streamed down his face, streaking his cheeks. So you destroyed them, Aroka said coldly. I only wanted them gone, Gregory muttered. But they wouldn't leave. Everyone loved them. The villagers, the children. They made me look small in my own church. His voice rose, trembling. I thought I was doing God's will, but I became the devil instead. News of his confession spread like wildfire through the village. The people who once knelt before him now gathered outside the station, murmuring in disbelief. Some refused to believe it even after seeing the news reports. Others wept openly, ashamed that they had ever called him father. The bishop arrived days later, pale and shaken. You have brought shame upon the church, Gregory, he said during a closed meeting. May God have mercy on your soul. The following week, the police tracked the assassins, Mitch and Leon, to a small apartment in the city. A nighttime raid unfolded. Shots rang out in the dark alley, echoing through the streets. When the dust settled, both men were in custody, wounded but alive. Inside the apartment, they found cash envelopes marked with the parish's emblem and a torn letter from Father Gregory, instructing them to clean up the forest matter. There was no denying it anymore. When the story reached the public, the once praised church was now surrounded by silence. Parishioners stopped attending. The bell tower stood still. Candles went unlit. Meanwhile, in prison, the 2 black pastors, Samuel and David, were finally exonerated after 28 long years. When they were released, their hair had turned gray, but their spirits remained unbroken. As they stepped into the sunlight, the villagers lined the road, bowing in shame and tears. Pastor Samuel looked to the sky and whispered, God sees. Father Gregory, now stripped of his title, sat alone in his cell, his Bible open on his lap, though his eyes no longer read the words. His once immaculate hands trembled as he stared at the wall. Every night he saw the faces of the 2 pastors in his dreams, their voices whispering, Why, Father? And for the rest of his life, there would be no answer, only silence, and the sound of his own heart breaking beneath the weight of his sin. The courthouse was shrouded in a heavy silence, the kind that presses against the chest and makes it hard to breathe. People filled every bench, villagers, journalists, police officers, and government officials. Yet no one dared whisper. They had come to witness the final chapter of a story that had shaken their faith, their village, and their souls. 2 elderly men were escorted to the front row. Their steps were slow, their bodies frail but dignified. Pastor Samuel and Pastor David, once full of life and purpose, now bore the weight of 2 decades of wrongful imprisonment. Their hair had silvered, their skin had thinned, and their eyes held a quiet sorrow, yet also a deep, unwavering strength. Across the room, guarded by 2 officers, stood Father Gregory. Not in his robes, not with his Bible, but in a prison uniform, wrists chained, shoulders sunken. He looked smaller than he ever had before. His lips moved silently over and over. Forgive me, Lord, forgive me. The judge entered. Everyone stood. When they sat again, the judge's voice echoed through the chamber. This court has listened to confessions, examined evidence, and heard the cries of the innocent. and the guilt of the guilty. A murmur of grief swept through the room. Father Gregory Marin, the judge continued, you are found guilty of conspiracy to murder, wrongful imprisonment, bribery, and assassination. The court sentences you to death by hanging. Father Gregory didn't flinch. His eyes closed. A tear ran down his cheek, perhaps for his sins, or for the life he could never return to. Leon Hurst and Mitch Carter, the judge said, turning to the assassins seated in another cage, you are found guilty of murder and conspiracy. You are also sentenced to death by hanging. Both men bowed their heads. Their fate had been sealed the night they pulled the trigger in the forest. The judge turned to the fourth man. Lucas, you provided evidence. You confessed to your role. You failed to stop the crimes, but you helped uncover the truth. For that, your life is spared. You are hereby sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. Lucas nodded with trembling lips. He whispered, thank you, though no one knew if it was to the judge or to God. Then came the moment the entire village had waited decades for. The judge stood and faced the two pastors. Reverend Samuel Adeyemi and Reverend David Ndlovu, you were wrongfully accused, unjustly imprisoned, and robbed of 28 years of your life. This court declares you innocent on all charges. A hush. Then tears. Not cheers. Only tears. You will be compensated by the state and the church for the years stolen from you. Samuel and David did not smile. They simply bowed their heads. For them, freedom was not joy but a quiet, aching relief. The hanging. 3 days later, before dawn, the execution grounds were prepared. The sky was still dark, the air heavy with dew. A gallows stood in the center, silhouetted against a faint, pale light creeping over the horizon. The two pastors stood near the front, not out of vengeance, but because they believed they must face this chapter with open eyes, not turn away from justice, even when it was painful. Villagers gathered behind them, heads covered, hands clasped in prayer. Father Gregory was brought forward. He stumbled once. His lips trembled. I only wanted to serve God, he whispered to the priest beside him. I became what I preached against. Beside him, the new priest, Father Emmanuel, a man whose kindness had slowly begun to mend the broken church, answered softly, God's mercy is still yours if you truly repent. The executioner placed the noose around Gregory's neck. Across the field, the church bell, silent for months, began to toll. 1, 2, 3. Samuel's eyes filled with tears. Beside him, David whispered, voice low and broken, Justice may sleep, but it never dies. The platform beneath the condemned dropped. The bell tolled one final time. The execution sent shockwaves across the village. Articles were written, debates held, and the church issued a nationwide apology. Donations poured in for the two pastors. But no amount of apologies could return the years lost. The church reopened under Father Emmanuel's care. This time, sermons were about humility, repentance, and unity, regardless of skin, tribe, or tongue. Children who once ran to Father Gregory now stood quietly, unsure of what faith meant anymore. But Father Emmanuel would kneel to their height and say, Faith is not in men. It is in God. Over the next few months, villagers rebuilt what had been broken. They repainted the chapel walls. They returned to the pews, slowly, cautiously. Hymns filled the air once more, but they were softer now, more solemn. Despite the villagers begging them to stay, Pastor Samuel and Pastor David made their choice. We cannot remain where our blood cries out from the ground, Pastor Samuel said gently. You loved us once, then abandoned us, Pastor David added, not in anger, but in truth. Children clung to their robes. Old women wept, begging forgiveness. Young men knelt, promising to rebuild the church in their honor. The two men blessed them. We forgive you, but we must go home. Their bags were few. They owned nothing but a Bible, a few clothes, and scars no eye could see. As they stepped into the carriage that would take them to the port, the villagers sang, not a song of joy, but of sorrow and gratitude. Women laid palm leaves on the road. Men bowed their heads. At the final bend before the path disappeared, Pastor David turned, his eyes glistening. "We came to serve. We suffered, but we forgive. May you never let evil wear the mask of holiness again." Then they were gone.